Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the SIO June monthly webinar. Thank you for participating with us today. If you have any questions for the presenters, please be sure to send them to the Q&A box at any time located on your toolbar. The presenters will be answering all questions at the end of the presentation. You can also use the chat box to contact our organizer directly if you have any technical difficulties or any questions. As a reminder, the webinar will be recorded and posted to the SIO YouTube channel for your reference. I am happy to introduce our moderator for today's webinar, Rebecca Leary. For over 20 years, Rebecca has offered yoga and bodywork, specializing in yoga for anyone touched by cancer since 2018. Her classes and workshops are available virtually in Atlanta and nationally. In private practice, Rebecca, a certified yoga therapist, works with individuals seeking balance in mind, body, and breath. Rebecca serves on the board of the Southern Jewish Research Network for Gender and Sexual Diversity, and is a member of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion subcommittee of the Yoga Special Interest Group for the Society of Integrative Oncology, SIO. I'll leave it over to you, Rebecca.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Morgan, and welcome everyone, and welcome to our panelists. And I'm very excited to be here. Let me introduce our panelists. Dr. Mandy Pratt-Chapman is Associate Professor of Medicine for the GW, George Washington School of Medicine and Health Sciences, Associate Professor of Prevention and Community Health for the GW Milken Institute School of Public Health, and Associate Center Director, Patient-Centered Initiatives and Health Equity for the GW Cancer Center. Her personal mission is to make evidence-based healthcare and disease prevention strategies available to more people as quickly as possible. Her research focuses on patient navigation, cancer survivorship, evidence-based cancer control, and health equity for intersectional, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex communities. Mandy tells me that her associate director title has changed to Community Outreach and Engagement. Thank you, Dr. Pratt-Chapman. I'm going to introduce everyone, and then we'll come back and start the panel. Dr. Scout is the Executive Director of the National LGBT Cancer Network and the Principal Investigator of the CDC-funded LGBTQ Tobacco-Related Cancer Disparity Network. That's a mouthful. In this capacity, he spends much of his time providing technical assistance for governmental, tobacco, and cancer-focusing agencies, expanding their reach and engagement with LGBTQ populations. He leads a team of specialists who focus on building tools and sharing strategies across state departments of health. And finally, Daniel G. Garza has been a patient leader for over 20 years. He speaks publicly about his HIV diagnosis in September of 2000, anal cancer in May 2015, and an ostomy in April 2016. Daniel shares his story on social media through several campaigns, including Positively Fearless. He volunteers for Radiant Health Centers and other organizations and works with NMAC as a consultant. Through his company, Lil Mexican Productions, Daniel and his partner Christian produce live stream content that is geared towards adding positive messages to the HIV, cancer, and LGBTQ communities. Wow, thank you so much for being here, and we will begin our presentation with Dr. Pratt-Chapman.
Thank you so much. Yes, us academics like to have lots of titles. They are for a reason, but sorry about the long titles. So I'm gonna just go to this. Hopefully, there we go. You see that okay? You can see my screen okay? Perfect. Okay, so I just wanted to start with my pronouns, she and her. So I don't know a lot about this group, so I'm going to do my best to address what I was asked to talk about, but happy to take questions for sure. And I'm also going to put a bunch of resources in the chat, which may be appropriate or may need to be adapted for what you need. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is kind of how do we find lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex people? We haven't systematically collected these data in research or in clinical care. The National Cancer Institute recently released a report or commissioned a report from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, Medicine to come up with some consensus around how to ask some of these questions. And I know that Scout has some opinions on this. I have some opinions on this. A lot of us do. They're by no means perfect. I'm going to go through a couple of examples, but they are a start. And so if you want to read the whole report, you can look at it. You can Google for the report title. We also had a webinar with Kellen Baker, which you can access the archived version at bit.ly/SOJI_webinar, SOJI standing for sexual orientation and gender identity. In terms of some of the challenges of the, why are you not moving forward for me? Let's see. In terms of some of the challenges of the way that the National Academies report suggested that we ask these questions, they asked us to ask, what sex were you assigned at birth on your original birth certificate? And so that was generally okay, although there are some states that are allowing for X now, but that hasn't been validated. So I would add an X there. They also, for their current gender, they had female and male. I changed that to man and woman. And they have select one for all of these, which makes it highly problematic for anyone who is transgender to know whether they are a man or a woman. It also makes it problematic if you are cisgender or transgender and you want to select man or woman. We can't tell those apart. So I know Scout has recommended that we just have a select all that apply, which does improve the question substantially. The other recommendation was not to use Two-Spirit unless there was an American Indian, Alaska Native race ethnicity option selected prior, because there are some trends of non-American Indian individuals selecting Two-Spirit. So in recognition of that, in honor of the actual tradition of the Two-Spirit people, we want to try to avoid lumping those individuals together. So generally, I just kind of wanted to point out, like, think about, what are you really asking? Are you asking, if you're in integrative oncology, does it really matter what sex the person was assigned at birth, or is asking about gender really what you need to know? For other clinicians, do you need to know about hormone balance, past surgeries, or current anatomy, as opposed to sex assigned at birth? So just kind of being thoughtful about what we're asking about. Sexual orientation. So again, these were, I was kind of asked to talk about affirming cues for LGBTQI population. So having any questions that allow people to say who they are is a helpful start. Again, for the National Academies, they recommended this question on sexual orientation: which of the following best represents how you think of yourself? Again, I don't love the select one option. As a researcher, I know it's hard to deal with categories that are when there's more than one selected, but I think that's a problem that we need to grapple with, as opposed to putting people in boxes that they don't align with who they are. But it's a start. In electronic health records, I don't know how many of you are using these, but I just wanted to point out, this is an example of having an organ inventory for either organs that patient currently had at birth, or were surgically enhanced, as well as any potential for pregnancy. So examples of looking at what you're actually looking for in terms of an answer or questions that might inform your practice, as opposed to making assumptions about a particular gender marker. Some things to know in terms of affirming cues: terms to use, a chosen name. A lot of us have names that we choose, and not just those who are not cisgender. So that's something that could be helpful to all patients and people coming into a practice. Gender, male, female, non-binary, trans, and I actually apologize, non-binary is hyphenated there. I've moved to a non-hyphenated wording on that based on feedback I've been getting around affirming terminology. Sex assigned at birth is the sex that someone else has given a person. And then pronouns, he, him, she, her, they, them are most common, but there's lots of terms to be aware of. In the right-hand column, neopronouns. These are gender neutral pronouns in place of they, them. And there's a number of them, and I'm not completely up to speed. I know that the younger people are, the more neopronouns I feel like there are. So it's hard to kind of keep up. So the key here is listen to what someone's pronouns are and mirror what the person is saying that they would like to be called in terms of their name, in terms of their pronouns. One other thing to mention, transgender individuals, they come along a wide spectrum of bodies and experiences. So don't assume that someone is at a certain stage of transition. They may be fully transitioned and living in their trans presence, whether or not they've had top surgery, bottom surgery, whether or not they're on hormones. So just really listening to the person in front of you and affirming the identity that they share with you. Physical cues, so having non-discrimination policies publicly posted that include sexual orientation and gender identity. Rainbows are a big cue for us. We kind of tend to see those. I'm not sure if they stand out as much to straight cis people, but we are used to kind of looking for the tiny rainbow somewhere to see if things are safe. Brochures, posters, just include the diversity of people that you want to serve. I thought a really interesting study that I read recently was that queer people were asked about what they wanted on brochures and posters and images. And they said, I want people that look like me, and I want people that don't look like me. I want a lot of people. I want a lot of different people. So just make your visual cues based on who you want to serve, right? So, and the diversity of that spectrum. Staff training and resources, make sure that you know at least about your local community center. There's one in almost every county. So know about your LGBTQ resources, probably the health care quality index. I don't know how many people that will apply to, but it's basically something that hospitals can participate in or clinical programs can participate in, indicating kind of a certain level of engagement with the LGBT community, to include non-discrimination policies. Having a designated patient advocate is an example. You can kind of elect from a menu to show that you are being intentional about being affirming to these populations. Posters can help, but even more important is actually having a gender neutral bathroom. So make sure that you have a safe space for people to be able to do some of the most basic function that a human needs to do, right? Without feeling threatened. And then we have a few resources that we've developed on my team. This I Want You to Know card asks patients about a number of questions: their name, their pronouns, who they want involved in their care, any challenges they might be experiencing that they want to share with you. The You Are Welcome Here poster is in 7 languages and has the rainbow, and then the Practice Patient-Centered Care has tips. So I'm going to throw these into the chat and give you my email, my Twitter information. And then about a week ago, I decided that I had a lot of other ideas outside of cancer that I wanted to explore. So I also founded a nonprofit recently called Inclusivity, and it's at radicalinclusivity.net. So I will share that as well. Feel free to check that out. But it's really aimed to try to promote dialogue and inclusivity training and arts-based research to try to bring people closer to each other and to the planet for sustainability. So that's kind of my side gig right now. I will stop, and I'm happy to take any questions that come up. I think we're doing them at the end. Okay. And I think I did okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pratt-Chapman. We will do questions at the end, and we'll move on now to Dr. Scout.
Thanks, Rebecca. And let's see, let me get to my slides as well. I believe you can see all that, right? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, excellent. I'm gonna kind of romp through a little bit of what we see as trends and changes in the arena right now. I'll just do my time check to make sure I stay in my time here. That's who I am, sorry. And I have some conflicts there. I have some really quick conflicts. It's all educational stuff, don't worry, I have no commercial interests. If you're not familiar with us, we educate our own communities about our cancer disparities, advocate for the mainstream cancer world to include us, and do lots and lots and lots and lots of provider trainings. We've also got a lot of resources that we put out in our newsletters, so I encourage you to join our listserv. It's free, or become a member if you're an organization. That's also free. And we collect a lot of online resources and put them in our resource library. So if you do anything that's LGBTQ and cancer specific, I encourage you to please send it to us so we can put it up there and make sure some of this stuff doesn't get forgotten in the ephemera of the world. All right, so what are some things that are starting to change about this field, or that are kind of the bigger trends that are happening right now? Oh, first of all, let me go back. People might be familiar with some of those flags you see there. Like, for example, this is the non-binary flag. This is the trans flag, things like that. They're certainly coming into very widespread use, especially in the younger population. And there's a proliferation of all these different identity labels, which we kind of love because it means that people find a home for themselves and don't feel as isolated in the world. So particularly with the young population, we're seeing kind of a lot more stuff we have to train on when we do this kind of cultural humility training with providers. I think the real big change in our world right now, in our population, is that the number of people, the denominator of queer people in this country, is really shifting. In the most recent study, it went up to 7.1%. But look at how it breaks out with the generations. Over 1 in 5 Gen Z adults are identifying as queer right now. And that is a huge shift. It had been at 4% my whole life. But over the last 10 years, it's really starting to slide upwards. And to put that in perspective, when Gallup started doing their study on this in 2012, a decade ago, it was only 3.4%. So if we take that shift and look at it into the future, you can see that I've projected it out. And of course, it's not real. But according to the current rate of change, by 2054, 100% of the US population would be queer. So clearly, I need to take all my vitamins. It's not really going to happen, but it does show you that this is a big shift in the population. Another key thing to note about this is, particularly among the youth, this is from Trevor Project, another demographic shift is a huge number of the youth identifying as either trans or non-binary. Trans used to be a very small subset of our population. Non-binary wasn't even a word that was being used very much. So again, this is a pretty big change. And it also means that, like, as anybody who's working in the arena, if we're not used to things like using they, them as a singular pronoun, it's about time for us to get used to it. And as you can see there, a lot of these youth unfortunately experience negative discrimination early in their life, which has a bigger impact over their whole life course and their health stability. What does it mean for us as people who are serving this arena? There is a big change coming. And if we're still doing, one size fits all, business as usual, we treat everybody the same, we're rapidly starting to look like our own grandparents. We really need to start changing with the times, make sure we have tailored services. Another key important thing about the population is that we are much more diverse than the general population. The general US population, about 24% of them identify as BIPOC. In our communities, 42% of us do. So intersectionality for us is really not an option. It should be built into all tailoring from the very beginning. Okay, what's another big trend that's really affecting our communities and making a big difference? We are in the middle of a historic level of anti-queer and mostly anti-trans youth legislation. You can see that from that chart that there are, and you can see from the headline, 240 anti-queer bills filed in the first 3 months alone of 2022. And from that chart, you can see how this is, again, every year we're setting a new record with the amount of this legislation being filed. We know from research that this affects our mental health, whether or not we're in a state that actually passes the legislation. We feel under fire, and that has a pretty big impact on how comfortable we feel at health providers' offices. It also affects health in other, direct ways, because unfortunately our states are usually the places that provide a lot of the safety net and underserved population healthcare. So we do things like, Cancer is so related to our increased tobacco use. We have increased smoking rates. We were delighted to see that like tobacco-free Florida was sponsoring Pride, until we also saw that this year, the Florida Department of Health, which is the same entity, was also putting out an organizational statement quoting, let's just be honest, dubious science. They'd skipped places like the American Medical Association, and they instead went to the Catholic Medical Association so that they could assemble science saying that trans healthcare for trans teens was bad. So what I'm saying is that unfortunately, when those same organizations that are providing a lot of the safety net, health behavior, and cancer services for us are putting out anti-trans and anti-queer statements, it makes us extra suspicious. Another big shift in the world right now is, as everybody knows, after the racial reckoning with George Floyd, there is an increased focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. What this means for us is that we every year are breaking records about the number of organizations who are coming to our doors saying, please, let's get us trained. And please, we need to do more tailored work related to queer cancer in engagement. And we love that. It also makes us tired, but it does mean that we hope that there's going to be more and more resources built by a variety of organizations in the near future. Another big thing we have just affecting the cancer world is this big backlog of screenings. This is only the first half of 2020, 10 million screenings were missed. How will that affect the queer population specifically? We already have a tendency to get screened later and our cancers are found later because of our provider mistrust, because fewer of us have a medical home. When you add the pandemic screening backlog in, it means that we are likely to be dealing with this for many, many years in the future and longer than the general population will be. One of the good things to come out of that is that American Cancer Society pulled together all these influential places, including all these acronym-filled places here, to come up with a response to it. One of the things we were excited about was they, in there, said that collecting sexual orientation and gender identity data was going to be a key part of getting rid of this backlog. It's really great to see them go on the record about something that's not yet being done very much, but we know is the cutting edge of change in this arena right now. But as people I hope are familiar with, we do not have our own civil rights nationally. If we are covered by any civil rights legislation, it's only on a city by city or state by state basis. So we were excited to see this happening last year on the Hill, a big forum talking about passing national civil rights, until we saw that it was sponsored by the tobacco industry. So there's just a bunch of ways that the tobacco industry particularly, being so tied with our ultimate cancer disparities, is still kind of sidling its way into our life, into our culture, and pretending like they are one of our best friends. If the healthcare world would do nearly as much as the tobacco industry does to portray themselves as our best friends, our cancer disparities would drop so much. Just another big shift we have just in the cancer world, of course, is that the cancer moonshot has been reduxed. These are actually some pictures of the launch event. And it just struck me as I was there that we have never been in a position of having as many people who are as motivated as our president's family, and then obviously Vice President Harris' family, about doing something to change the trajectory of cancer in our communities. So I really hope this is going to gather steam over the next few years. The nice thing for queers is that while we begged to be in the first moonshot program and kind of got tacked on at the end, they're listening to us and talking to survivors and things like that. This is actually Tony, one of the survivors they've been talking with, around how to build our concerns in at the beginning of the moonshot program. So maybe that'll create substantive change too. One of the things we were really delighted to launch last year was the findings from our National Cancer Survey. We've got several different launch events with a lot of survivors, including Garza, who you're going to hear next, talk about their experiences. They're all on our website. I encourage you to check them out because it's really good to hear these firsthand stories. But what did we really learn is one of the big takeaways I want to make sure that you know from this, that there is one thing that is so fixable about the way cancer care is going wrong for us. And that's the fact that only 12% of us could find that environmental cue, like Mandy was just talking about, that we were welcome in care. So if you don't get anything else from what I say, please understand this. We are suspicious of negative treatment. We have a history of negative treatment. We are asking the health provider community, please show us it's safe. This idea of providing environmental cues that it's going to be safer for us to, go to your support group, go get cancer care. All these things are something that can be easily fixed. And we're really excited to see this. If there was one strong outcome from our forthcoming multivariate analysis from the survey, this is the biggest number we found, that the people who rated their providers as very welcoming were almost 7 times as likely to also report being very satisfied with cancer care. So again, we can change that if we make both our people, our training systems, and our environment very welcoming. It has a huge impact on how satisfied our population is with our care. So that said, what are the kinds of things that you can do now to really take strong steps in this direction? The first one, and I'm going to use Spitfire Strategies, a PR firm, as an example, because they required it and mandated across all their people, is use this idea of introducing yourself with your pronouns. Just to say, if you introduce yourself with your pronouns, it does not mean you're queer. It means that you acknowledge that there's a large percent of the population, well, not the overall population, but certainly of the trans and gender non-conforming population, like me, who have experienced a lot of hostility, a lot of aggression, a lot of aggravation and frustration related to people presuming they knew our pronouns. And you do not want to further be part of that. Not only that, but it also shows to queer people, whether or not they've had problems with discordant pronouns, that you are showing that you are understanding some of the particular issues our population faces. So it's a great way to also convey that you're a safe space. The second thing is you see that sign to the right, the signs that Mandy talked about too. And I would even expand this beyond physically to make sure that you include your web presence and your advertising too. What are you doing to give that cue that we're welcome, whether you're advertising on your website or in your physical bricks and mortar locations? This sign here, which is by UCSF, I like it. Mandy's sign is great too. We have another one like it ourselves as well. The truth is, I see things like this more frequently at restaurants than I do at healthcare providers. And that's such a fail, because if my bakery is more interested in telling me that I'm welcome there than any of my oncologists or any of my supportive care related to oncology, that's such a miss, right? So again, pretend like you're one of us, or get advisors who are us and have them look at the different ways you put yourself out there into the world, both on the web and physically. Where can we see any cue that we might be safe with you? And the third thing, American College of Radiologists, I've been presenting to them a couple times this month. They've been really frustrated that there is not more work on how to provide welcoming support, how to even train their own provider base, things like that. So they're leaning in and going to create tailored resources, both for their own members on how to do a better job with radiology for queer people, but then also create tailored resources for the users who need to go through radiology, who are queers. So I just encourage you as SIO or as individuals in the different areas that you're working in, create tailored resources for us, please. If you wait for organizations like mine or Mandy's or things like that to get all of them created, we will be slow because we're just not that big. And then the last thing, we talked a little bit about data collection. I would say that data collection is super important whenever you're at any kind of, a critical mass. It also is another way to show welcoming. I had it still makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck, engagement with my local federally qualified health center when I literally went in to get crown put back on. So I just had, one appointment with them, but when I went in, I saw a sign like this. I saw that they were collecting information on whether I was queer in their intake form. They also had something up about what they were doing for Pride, even though it wasn't Pride Month, which was great. And then I got my crown on. And then the amazing part was afterwards, they called me up and said, hey, we saw that you checked that you were trans. This is the trans welcoming team. We just wanted to tell you that we actually have trans pool nights, trans game nights, and trans yoga that we're offering for the population. And that is where the hair stood up on my neck. I realized for the first time in my life, I wasn't just tolerated by a healthcare provider, but I was valued and celebrated. And that was, and how much does it cost them to offer a trans pool night once a month? Not very much. But what did it convey to me as far as how much I wanted to be at that organization? A huge amount. So again, it's another way you can show welcome. And I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to really quickly go through this one on the right here, because it's a good example, if you're not used to they, them, on how to practice so you can get better at it. Oops, nope, that's the left. We're gonna try that again. Click on the right, there we go. Can you guys hear it?
There's no sound.
Okay. Sorry about that. I will offer those. Thanks, Garza, for jumping in there, because I can't tell if you could hear it or not. All right. I'm going to offer the link to those after the fact so you can go there. But these are two just good short ways to kind of A, understand why pronouns are important, and then B, to actually practice using they, them if you're not familiar with it. So again, we'll offer that as a link to follow up for this. Nope, keep going, keep going, keep going. There we go. All right, then the last thing I'm going to close with is what are some new resources in the field that we really hope you link to and use. And likewise, I hope you also create some of your own that you might be able to help us link to too. The first one, if you do anything related to smoking cessation or know anybody who does, we've got a landing page to try and encourage us to use cessation services. We're much less likely to use standard cessation services even when we want to quit smoking. Why? Likely because we're suspicious about them and we're not sure if they're welcoming. So this is a way to kind of have a tailored product and for cessation that can encourage us to move forward. And again, as we know, a huge % of cancers are completely related to smoking. So our increased smoking rates are something we really need to change. Next, we're super happy to have just launched a trans cancer page, one of the first ones we know about that has stories, resources, information. Again, please link to this. Imagine that we make all these resources and we give them away, but we are kind of like making gardening tools and we don't have a lot of land. You who work with the people who are actually experiencing this have the land, so please use our tools. We also have free thrice weekly support groups. These are the first ones we know of around the country. And spread the word, because this is one of the highest demand things that people talked about in the survey. Oh, look, there's Garza. So the guy who's going to talk next is one of the people who gave their story for the Frankly Sex After Cancer microsite. So if you don't have information about sex after cancer is something you're would appropriately be talking to people about, check out the site, check out Garza's story. He's going to talk to you some about it in just a second. But there's a whole bunch of other people on there too. This has been an area where we've had too little information. And then we also are super happy to launch this 8-part training series. The first 5 are active right now. As you can see, it's free for 2022. This is the first 5 are for anybody who's in the cancer sphere, honestly, anybody who's in the health sphere. The last 3 are specific to gynonc clinical care for trans people, but these first 5 are for anybody. So spread the news, take the training, learn more. You can understand a lot of these new identity labels that might be confusing everybody. This is an example, but you won't be able to hear that either. Nope, keep going, keep going. There we go. That was an example of one of the animations we use with it, with one of the provider stories we have built in. But since the sound isn't working, I will also send that as a link. And if you know people who are either early career, who are queer and or BIPOC, and or you might have an internship opportunity, please contact us, because next month we are launching this new pipeline diversity program, Cancer Leaders Like Us. And of course, if you're on our mailing list, you're going to get more information. So again, get on the mailing list. And then Monday, a week ago, we were super happy to also launch a new toolkit for one of the most high prevalence cancers, colorectal cancer. So we have a whole website with a bunch of resources, including outreach materials you see on the right there. And if you are one of our member organizations, you can put your logo on these materials and use them as your tailored outreach. So again, another reason to consider being a member, and please spread the news on this. And I think that that is it for me. This is all of us. And now I'm gonna turn it back over to y'all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Scout. And if we have some time at the end, maybe we can get you to share computer sound so we can go back and have some of those.
One thing I forgot to click.
But if not, then you've made them available, and we can make them available as well. Next up is Daniel G. Garza. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. I didn't realize that my introduction to this presentation would be Dr. Scout's slide of me talking about my sexual activity. But I guess that's how we should start this presentation.
Sorry, Garza. Sorry.
I'm not going to share. It's a good thing we're friends, or I would be like, what? I just wanted to share a couple of things. It's not a big presentation, but this is for those of you in anal cancer world. It's over. Anal cancer awareness is identified by those two colors. That's our ribbon. I am an anal cancer survivor, and I'll tell you more about that in just a second. My part is about what went right and what went wrong. I'm not going to put up the slides too long. I just wanted to give you the intro. I don't prepare slides, so I wanted to feel like part of the club and make sure that I had something to show you. But good morning, everybody. My name is Daniel G. Garza. I'm an anal cancer survivor. I've been in the HIV community for almost 22 years, and I was diagnosed with anal cancer. I also do comedy, so my joke is always that I'm so Mexican. I was diagnosed on Cinco de Mayo, but part of the presentation today is about what went right and what went wrong in those moments. And I want to start with the right things, because there are some things that happen that really made me feel that I was heard and I was seen as not just Latino, but also part of the LGBTQ community. The doctor that I was referred to, Dr. Rad, here in Orange County, I'm in Orange County, California. And the day we went in, I went in with my boyfriend. We had been together just over 2 years at that time. And the wonderful thing that's from the moment we walked in, the staff, the receptionist, the doctor, all acknowledged Christian, my partner, and made sure that he was part of the conversation. They knew because of the experience, and for those of you who have been through cancer, you hear about 50% of what the doctor says to you in the moment, because all that's really running through your head is cancer, 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 cancer. And the other part is the peanuts teachers, wah, 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 wah. So it was really important for me to have Christian there with me to listen to the things that I was not ready to hear. And having the doctor, the staff, everybody just welcome him into the conversation, no questions asked. There was never about who is he, why is he here, can he wait in the lobby? The moment they saw him with me, they were like, oh, come on in. And that was a really cool thing that made me feel comfortable. Not to mention the fact that he was referred to me by my primary doctor, who has retired now, but he is gay. I had a gay doctor who understood everything that I was going through. Anyway, that's it. One of the things that my doctor did the moment that I was diagnosed, I'm not a big in-person crier. It's the Latino macho, you gotta keep it in. He came up to me when I was crying and put his hand on my shoulder and looked at and said, look at me. And I was like, I'm fine, I'm good. He was like, look at me. I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm trying to avoid it. And finally he raised his voice and said, look at me. And when I looked into his eyes, he says, we got this. And that was the second thing that made me feel like I was in the right place with the right doctor. Because it wasn't about, you're gonna be fine, everything's gonna be great, or, I've seen this 100 times. It's all the typical things that doctors usually tell you in an effort to relax you. He was like, we got this, we're in this together. And he looked over at Christian and goes, we'll talk about the process later. Let that sink in today. And that was really cool, because that was enough information for one day. I didn't need to know right away when we were going to start treatment, it was just about let this sink in today. We did talk about that some of the options were surgeries, chemo, radiation, but when, where, how, that wasn't important at the moment. It was just about how I was going to deal with it in that moment. And again, the wonderful thing about it was having Christian there with me and having my life partner, who then became my caregiver. Now we're going to talk about some of the things that didn't go right, that now as an advocate, I talk to people about when they're going to go get their diagnosis or when they're thinking about getting checked. Number one, we did not talk about the impact that it would have in our relationship. We were early on in our relationship, and it's very easy for a lot of people to jump into caregiver mode. You just start taking care of your partner, your mom, your sister, etc. But it's very difficult to jump out of that role. Christian was my caregiver for about 1.5 years. It went from a hernia surgery to cancer to an ostomy surgery. So I was in bed pretty much 1.5 years. But it took about 2 years for him to come out of caregiver mode, which is very difficult on a relationship when you're trying to be, when me as a patient, I'm trying to be romantic again, have a relationship with my boyfriend, but he's still in caregiver mode during 2 different levels, but nobody talked to us about that. Nobody mentioned the fact that we should have gone into therapy right away. It was really important for us. It would have been very important for us to start therapy the day I got diagnosed, not when I was going to treatment, not when I was done, but at the beginning, so that I knew some of the things that I had to tackle. Sex. Nobody talks to you about what's going to happen to sex when you have anal cancer. And as the post that Dr. Scott put up, I identified as a bottom. I was submissive most of my life. So in sex, when you are talking about anal cancer and how that is going to affect my sexuality, my sex, my offering sexually to my partner, it really messed with my head. I was 44 years old when I was diagnosed. So for most of my life, sexually, that was my gift when we were having relationships. And now what do I offer? And I know some of you are thinking, well, there's so many other things that you can do. You can get creative. You don't think about the creative parts, or at least I didn't. That was it. So yes, we've discovered other ways, and yes, we've talked about other things, and we've gotten a little more creative over the last couple of years. But in that moment, at that time, after radiation and chemo, that wasn't the first thing on my mind. It was like, I'm a loser. What do I have to offer this relationship? What am I giving my partner now? So those talks are really important, because it's little known facts that for anybody that does radiation, the inflammation can last up to 10 years before you're back to normal. That includes erectile dysfunction. So again, I'm a Mexican, I'm a macho. Like, I depend on my penis to identify me. I know y'all are thinking like, no, it doesn't. Yes, it does. When it's your penis, it does. It really affects the way that I saw myself, but nobody talked to us about that either. So now that I do advocacy and I get a chance to talk to people about it and I get messages, I go through the checklist. Do you have a therapist? Do you have more than your partner or the caregiver? Do you need a group of people? Are you talking about sex now and after? Are you talking how it's going to change your life? Are you doing surgery, chemo, or radiation, and or all of these? What's going to happen? Start changing the way that you identify within the partnership, because it's going to affect you in the long run. We're 7 years post, and we're still going to therapy about some of the issues that we didn't get to talk about. We didn't know. Now, I'm not going to blame my doctor. He's straight, and I get it. That wasn't something he would have thought about. But now that I'm an advocate and I've been through it, I feel like it's my responsibility to make sure that I share that information. Now, ending this with what went right. Well, disclaimer and spoiler alert, I lived. So I made it through cancer. And just for records, 4th of July was the last day of my chemo. So this 4th of July, when you're popping fireworks and eating hot dogs and putting them in buns, think about me. But I'm better now. I'm healthy. I live with my ostomy. I'm a cancer survivor. I'm proud to say I'm an anal cancer survivor, because little known fact is that 1 in 500 people are diagnosed with anal cancer. Out of those, about 75% reach stage 4 or terminal, mainly because a lot of the symptoms are confused with other conditions. For instance, in Latinos, it's put up to like dietary situations, because we don't take care of ourselves. And in the gay community, sometimes anal cancer and the symptoms are associated with sex and not being careful during sex. So if you have any symptoms that you think like spotting, swellness, trouble going to the bathroom, please get a colonoscopy. And I guarantee you the colonoscopy is not as bad as you think. The worst thing is prepping for it, because once you're there, you're asleep. So that hose is not even going to matter. So I'm Daniel G. Garza. anal cancer survivor. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Daniel, Dr. Scout, Dr. Pratt Chapman. We are so grateful for all the information that you've brought to us today. And I'd like to open up the floor to questions from our larger group. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. There is a symbol at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A. And if you click there, you can add your questions. I see that Daniel has put his contact information in the chat, as has Scout, and I think Dr. Pratt Chapman did earlier. So looking forward to getting some questions. We don't have any questions right now. I think everyone is processing all of this rich information. And there is, of course, there is a conversation going on in the chat about the importance of talking about caregivers. And I can say as a yoga therapist that we recognize the caregivers and the providers as well as people who need support. And I was really interested to find out, I'll ask a question about yoga therapy. As a yoga therapist, and I'm part of the SIO, Society for Integrative Oncology, in this yoga special interest group. So we are a group of yoga therapists who provide different kinds of care in the cancer setting. And do any of your organizations have yoga as part of your resources? And I heard something about,
and I think we should talk to you about it. We should fix that, don't you think, Rebecca?
Yes, and I loved what you said about your provider. I can't remember, was it your dentist who had?
It was just a health center. So it was just a general health center that was providing trans-specific yoga as like a way to, reach our communities. And yeah, the way, again, hair stood up on my neck. I'm like, wow, I'm valued. You know what I mean? So we actually don't usually do direct service. We do systems change.
Right.
But because of some high demand areas, we have started like those support groups, and maybe yoga would be a great addition to it.
Well, I definitely think so. And yoga therapy itself involves working one-on-one with individuals, but there's also, of course, yoga classes, all of which are really, really important to people as they are dealing with their diagnoses, dealing with all of the things that you have brought up. I wanted to ask one other thing, as please, folks, we have this opportunity to talk with these people right here, right now. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. But Dr. Pratt Chapman, you talked about your not-for-profit radical inclusivity. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Sure. It was really just kind of, and I also see a question from Linda that I'd love to address too. That's
yes, please.
It was it kind of came out of a couple of things. I had a conversation with one of my staff who has really been challenged during COVID with childcare and like juggling work, home, and watching my own child go through middle school and COVID. And and I'm just kind of, as I try to do social media awareness campaigns in the cancer space, I'm kind of like acutely aware that it's often not about information. It's about the messenger and our polarization and our in and out group, which is very related to the kind of training that, Scout and I do for sure. But I just kind of wanted an avenue that would be available to me without the kind of red tape of needing to work through all of the university channels if I want to do, do certain things. So I asked a couple of colleagues of mine, one works for a wonderful organization called Nueva Vida, and she just had a dialogue last weekend about kind of LGBT visibility, which I thought was awesome, because I remember 10 years ago when I met her, she was like, don't talk about that. Latino people don't want to talk about that. And now she's seeing people build bridges and like be more accepting within her support circles, which I thought was awesome. And then another colleague of mine, Miranda Ward, who is a dynamo in the anti-racism space. And I just kind of said, hey, can we do something in terms of bringing people together in dialogue, train, do some arts-based research around people's experiences, you know, kind of even beyond the cancer space. So take a look if you'd like. I'd love to also answer the question that Linda had. She said, my group is keen to do research on the experiences and unmet needs of LGBTQ cancer patients in Canada, but we're unsure about how to partner and talk to patients without being tokenistic. Do you have advice on how to reach this group to participate in our studies? Yes, I would say first and foremost, find a trusted community partner. So there are LGBT centers. I don't know what their presence are in Canada, but I'm sure that there has to be one close to you. And if there's not one close to you, partner with Scouts organization or partner with another organization that has a reputation that's like, you know, that shows that you're not just kind of helicoptering in and helicoptering out. Find people who are queer in the community, who are advocates, who can be on the study team, who can weigh in on research design and recruitment and interpretation. Really, truly elevate the communities that you're trying to do research on so that they're part of your team.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, we have another question in the Q&A that says, can you speak about any barriers to clinical trials participation for LGBTQ cancer patients? Anyone would like to take that?
You know, I've been doing a fair amount of work with some clinical trial places that are interested in trying to expand this. The biggest barrier is, first of all, that if we already have a negative history of experiences with providers, why would we volunteer to do more, right? And if you think about it, a lot of clinical trials right now, they're not collecting data on us, which means they can't report back any data on us. We're actually a more altruistic group of people than the general population. So like if you tell us that it might benefit LGBTQ knowledge development and LGBTQ health, we're more motivated than the general population is to even join your clinical trial. But if you're not collecting any LGBTQ data, not giving us any resources back, then you're kind of taking and not giving. So again, why would we want to? Luckily, again, there are more and more, there's a lot more interest with the organizations. Actually, the Association of Clinical Research Professionals, ACRP, I believe it is, of the clinical trialists, is coming out with a Pride Month video about an interview with me around kind of like how to do it. I believe it is tomorrow or something like that. So, you know, we're seeing, and we've got big pharmas reaching out, things like that. One of the big pharmas is actually about to announce that all their clinical trials will be collecting LGBTQ data. So it's the same set of steps that you might see in any kind of direct care provision. First of all, show us we're safe. Look at what you're doing to make sure that it's welcoming. In a clinical trial, when that's research-based, it may have more things to do with like, do you have language that has to do with women blankety blank or something like that that may not match body parts or current gender identity, things like that. You know, do you have advisors basically saying, how does the actual engagement look? And then are you giving back at the end of it? So it's not too dissimilar from what a clinical care welcoming environment would be, just kind of morph that slightly for the research environment. And I would say that it's something that we know is the next horizon. We know it needs to happen. The number of oncologists who contact us saying, we don't have information in this, that, or the other. And we're like, yeah, because we're systematically excluded from all research endeavors is unfortunately just a shame right now and an area that we need to fix if we're going to get rid of this health disparity.
A couple of other things that I would note is making sure that you're not excluding someone based on gender marker. So, you know, make sure that you are not taking shortcuts in terms of like, okay, well, only men are included in the study, or only women are included in the study, or only female sex assigned at birth. Like, what are you actually asking? Are you asking, does someone have a cervix? Are you asking, do they have breast tissue? Like, what are you actually asking? So being more specific about what your eligibility criteria are to be as inclusive as possible and not unnecessarily exclude people. Also, in terms of ineligibility criteria, I have a bit of a beef on and I know that some folks who are much more expert in clinical trials don't agree with me, but I don't think you really need to have a pregnancy test for someone who tells you they haven't had, a woman who is a cisgender queer woman who's told you that she hasn't had intercourse with a man in, 5 years, 10 years, a year, whatever, I know that there are problems that come up, and that with cis heterosexual people, sometimes there have been occasionally people who are pregnant and didn't know they were pregnant. But when you're talking with the queer community, they probably know what their sexual behaviors are. And so don't exclude them by using non-affirming ineligibility criteria either.
Or one of our biggest studies around the country, BRFSS, asks you first, are you male or female? And if you're not able to answer, understand that growing non-binary population, they just exclude you. So again, how are we accidentally, throwing this population under the bus?
I had a question actually about something that you said earlier, Dr. Pratt Chapman, about, I can't remember exactly at what point this came up, but about changing female to woman and male to man. Can you talk about just a little?
Yeah, so female and male are typically terms that are asked about when you're asking about sex. In terms of gender, people usually identify as men or women, not female or male. And so some people feel more strongly than others, but I was surprised that the National Academy's report had female and male as the gender items. And actually, I have to say, I have to give a shout out to my straight friend, Miranda, who is CBPR and participatory action researcher, who we are partnering on a decolonizing series of workshops at GW, and we were having our demographic forum I was programming it into our database, and I was like, well, but the National Academies came out with these recommendations, and I'm trying to follow the rules because we want to have the data that is aligned. And she's like, but they're wrong. Like, she was the one that said to me, she's like, but that's not how people identify. And I was like, you know what, you're right. So like, she pushed back at me like pretty hard, and like a couple of times, and she's right, so didn't get it perfect, but it's a step, so we're going to keep building.
Well, we can all learn from each other, right? Okay, well, any other questions, please speak up now. And Scout, do you want to take an opportunity to try and show those TikToks and video? It's up to you. If we don't have any other questions,
I will send it after the fact. I think that
fair enough.
If anything, it's a good thing for people to think about when they have their own space. You know what I mean?
Okay, we don't want to go back. All right, well, thank you so much. If anyone has any questions.
Could I jump in for a second?
Oh, please, yes, Daniel.
I didn't want to not acknowledge Luna for the comment that she said about her partner might still be in caregiver mode. Probably. If you haven't talked about how to debrief from being a caregiver back to a partner, they're probably still there, because we didn't know we had to do that. We didn't know that there was a process to disconnect that energy. So for those of you that work in energies, for those of you that are spiritual, I'm a Reiki master, so we did a lot of work on that. There is a definite connection between body, mind, and spirit. And we had to get our minds out of that relationship. He was no longer my caregiver. I was no longer the patient. And then our bodies had to go from this doctor-patient feeling to, you're my boyfriend again. It's okay to hug and touch. I want to feel your body. I want to feel your warmth. And that really helped my spirit get back in place. But we had a lot of issues. And I know from friends with partners who have been through cancer, there's a lot of separations, there's a lot of breakups, there's divorces, because it's really hard to get your mind back into that space. So if you have a spiritual life coach, seek them out. If you have a Reiki master friend that can do some sessions on you.
Or a yoga therapist.
Yoga therapist, yes. I have not done that, so I can't recommend it off, but yes, call Rebecca. But we did the Reiki, we did the meditations, we did the spiritual coaching to make sure that we were back in those places. So just as a final recommendation for me is think about that. As they are coming into it, there needs to be an exit. And I had to fire Christian as my caregiver. We had to sit down. I was like, you are no longer my caregiver. You're my boyfriend. Can I have that energy back, please? So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any final statements or questions before we head out?
I just really want to see if SIO does create any custom materials or anything like that, or any just guidance for their own membership. I would love that to be shared if that ends up being the case.
Yes, I really appreciate that, and we will work on that. So a reminder to everyone listening that the recording of this session will be on the SIO YouTube channel. And I just want to thank the presenters so very much for sharing your time, your expertise, and we will have follow-up. I can guarantee it. And I appreciate your making the time and space for this. Thank you so much. Be well, and we'll see. We have these webinars monthly, so hope you all come back.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Andy,
much.
Garza, always good to be with y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Happy
Wonderful.
Pride Month, everyone.
Happy Pride.